why do ghostly voices throughout this building keep calling out the same name?
Who or what causes strange temperature fluctuations in this historical building?
Do shadow figures really hide amongst the artifacts?
Find out the answers to these questions and more as we uncover the temporal hauntings and history from the Kewaunee Jail Museum in Kewaunee, Wisconsin.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Erica.
And this is The Haunted Atlas, a Haunted U.S. podcast. In the interest of fully exploring history of certain locations, The Haunted Atlas may discuss sensitive or disturbing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Set on a quiet street in Kewaunee, Wisconsin, stands a jail designed to contain both inmates and the sheriff's own family. This stone and brick building witnessed brazen thefts, escape attempts both clever and violent, and a century of lives lived on both sides of the bars. Some believe the jail never truly emptied, its former sheriffs and prisoners still lingering. Before the Kewaunee Jail Museum was built onto the property, there was actually a wood frame jail that operated before the Kewaunee Jail we know today was built in the 1860s.
I guess in my head I always pictured jails as stone, never wood, so it's interesting to hear that. I mean, of course, that must have been the case at some point somewhere, but I've never thought about that.
Well, you would be correct, and there's a reason for that. So really, we're going to start with the plot of land rather than the building, because this first building had a super significant historical event happen. Joe Bushey was an inmate who was arrested in 1862 on the charges of stealing clothes from clotheslines, which would have been considered larceny at the time. He planned to set the building on fire in order to escape his trial. He did carry out the plan, but unfortunately, he lost his life in the process and was successful in burning down the entire jail.
So did he die in the jail then?
Yes.
Like he was trapped in the fire?
Yes.
Wow, what a way to go out. Also, what a random crime.
I know. Larceny was larceny has a whole history at this time. So, this was happening in the 1860s. Joe committed his crime right after Macy's had been established in 1858. And apparently, larceny charges increased a ton at this time because, with Macy's came more department stores, and middle and upper class women were stealing so much from the department stores that were being established that larceny, like I said, was increasing.
That at least makes sense to me. But to steal people's clothing, how do you know if it's going to fit you or anyone that you know? I guess you could potentially resell it, but...
That's a fair point. Maybe he was looking to resell.
Maybe.
It wasn't until 1876 that a new jail was built on top of the land. On the Kewaunee County Historical Society site, I found that the building reportedly cost $5,995 to build, which is $181,595 in today's money.
It's always surprising to me, the conversion, because I expect things like the jail to be like $1 million.
Yeah.
So to hear it's under $200,000 just blows my mind.
Yes, the housing inflation is crazy. Apparently, this new building was designed by a renowned architect of the time from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, who was named William Waters. And he actually designed some of the original buildings for the University of Wisconsin.
That's crazy.
At Madison.
Yeah, so he was all over the state, which for that time period is kind of interesting.
I know. Plus, it's cool to me that I feel like throughout history there have been renowned architects, and it's something that I don't think I don't know of any renowned architects today. I know they exist, but I'm just saying it's so interesting to read historical articles and hear about architects when we don't really hear about them a lot.
That's a good point, because I was like, what do you mean you don't know any Frank Lloyd Wright? But I see what you're saying. You mean currently alive.
Yes.
I also know of none.
Yeah. Now, this time the building was built of stone and brick, as you had mentioned earlier, to prevent any future fires from burning everything down. So something that was built into the building that was kind of common at the time, or at least becoming common, was a home specifically meant for the sheriff and their family was built directly into the building, hopefully boosting security. And this kind of started in Indiana. So Indiana had it written into law that the sheriff had to live on the premises. And so other buildings at this time that were being built, at least for jail purposes, of course, were kind of copying off of Indiana's blueprints.
That makes sense. I know that the old jail in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania also has warden's housing built into it.
Honestly, I'm thinking that even if like physically the sheriff living on the jail didn't provide security in like a logical or like testable way, you know, like scientifically, I do think that it might have been a placebo effect. Having the sheriff right there at all times probably was like a mental effect.
Right, and having someone additionally to the guards that I'm sure are there around the clock to respond and like hear things, I think adds some layer of security.
Right. Of course, with the sheriff being on the property, their family also became involved, and most of the spouses would actually take on some of the duties required to run the buildings, such as cleaning or like cooking for the inmates.
I feel like that breaks a barrier of professionalism and personal life almost, because when you are having a meal with someone or cooking a meal for someone, that humanizes them, not that you don't want these inmates to be humanized, of course, but I can imagine that it could potentially be challenging to have your spouse cooking meals for them, but then you have to, go in and be really harsh, etc.
That's such a fair point. And what I was wondering about was the children, because of course I'm sure some of the sheriff's families had kids, and I was wondering if they were involved at all. Kids are so willing to like form relationships with people, which is great. I mean, like it's almost nice to think about some of the prisoners maybe having a relationship outside of like their cell, you know, and kind of looking forward to connecting with the family. But yeah, I just wonder like how much and how far were they involved?
Right. Where is the line between work and literally home life?
Yeah. One super interesting sheriff that I read about was one named Emma Lutein, who became a sheriff in July 1925. Now, the circumstances of her becoming a sheriff was a little sad. Her husband, who was the current sheriff at the time, tragically passed away in a car accident. And the governor appointed her as the current sheriff, but she was also still responsible for the cooking and the cleaning and watching her kids.
That is a lot to take on.
Yeah.
And also very abnormal for the 20s.
Yes. It's so funny that you say that, because a newspaper article at that time actually reported that she was the first female sheriff, which I would believe, but that's actually not factually correct. There was another female sheriff in another part of Wisconsin that was appointed.
Wow, look at that, Wisconsin, cutting edge.
I know. So almost 100 years later, in the mid-1900s, the building is now aged and kind of falling apart, as you can imagine, right? Like, I'm sure that the facilities in the prison were kind of becoming outdated. In addition, the concept of a sheriff having a home on their jail's property wasn't really a feature that was included in a lot of the modern jails.
That makes sense. I can imagine you wouldn't want to be forced to live there. I mean, maybe if you didn't have a family and were single, that could be appealing because it's either free or low-cost housing.
True.
But if you want to have a relationship or a family or anything, I can imagine it would feel almost like having roommates, like someone watching over you.
That's a fair point. So overall, with these like outdated concepts of the building, there were a couple reasons for Kewaunee County to begin debating closing the building. One of these reasons was a few escape attempts. I'm just going to talk about 3 super interesting ones that I found. In 1966, and this is like the catalyst for closing. I'm going to do the one that really kind of closed the building down first. So in 1966, an inmate at Kewaunee Jail escaped and beat a security guard on their way out with like the foot of a claw tub.
Dang.
Yeah. And so for those who may not know what a claw tub is, I know these are kind of popular, but it's basically like a basin-shaped tub where it's not really connected to the wall or anything. You've just got these 4 claw feet at the bottom of it. And so I don't know where he was able to find one, or maybe he broke it off of one of the tubs, but
probably broke it off.
Now, in addition to this one, because of course this was, like I said, the catalyst, there were 2 other ones that I found that I was like, ooh, this is kind of interesting. So the first one I found, a brass key made from a water faucet, which I was like,
wow.
Yeah.
Was the person a metal worker of some sort?
You know, that's a good question. I couldn't find any information on like the personal details of this one, but they had to be, right? Because like, how do you just like make that out of a faucet?
I don't know. That's amazing.
Yeah. But that was found in one of the portholes, so very likely used as an escape tool. And then my personal favorite, A 20-year-old Nebraska man serving 90 days for theft charges used a toothbrush to open the main door of the building. And to think I've just been using mine to brush my teeth my whole life.
I know, you didn't know it could also be a house key.
Who knew? Crazier, the ending of the story. And I'm very sad that he was picked up, but he was unfortunately picked up because in Green Bay, Wisconsin, so he didn't get super far. He was caught stealing Green Bay Packer player Max McGee's car.
What a wild thing to do. I mean, did he know that it was his car?
I have to think no, right? Like, this is just so unfortunate.
Very high profile.
Yeah. A professional football player.
Yeah.
So with all of these things, the jail officially closed in 1969, and a new justice center was built the same year. Also in 1969, the county board actually voted to tear the building down, but very fortunately, it was saved by something called a non-binding referendum to turn it into a museum.
Oh, that's cool.
So basically what this means is that they allowed the town to vote on the issue. So they added, would you like this to be turned into a museum on a ballot? Mm-hmm. And non-binding means that they didn't legally have to follow through, that this was just kind of them asking and seeing what the town wanted. But the vote was 2,773 yes to 955 no.
I wonder why the no's.
I know, because here's the thing. That is an overwhelming, yes, most of the town wants it. But 955 people is not a tiny number.
Right, that's not an insignificant amount.
No. So then it fortunately reopened as Kewaunee Jail Museum in 1970, which I do feel like is a very rare thing. A lot of times these buildings sit for a while after closing, and then they have to do renovations. But since 1970, it's operated as a local history center.
That's really cool. I love when these haunted places can be turned into not the same use case, but something to honor the initial use case.
Yes, I agree. And with all of the history, not only in the building with the land, a history center seems really like you could put a lot in there.
Right.
Many individuals from all walks of life have passed through Kewaunee Jail Museum since the building's opening in 1876. But the paranormal reports from present-day visitors show that both sheriffs and inmates alike seem to be spending their afterlife in this storied building.
Hey guys, I'm Tommy from Tommy Cullum's Let's Get Freaky podcast, where we talk to real people and have real conversations about paranormal experiences, including ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, and all high strangeness, and even a little bit of conspiracy too. So if you enjoy these freaky conversations, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we're also available to watch on YouTube. Tommy Cullum's Let's Get Freaky.
Given the history of this land, from a burned-down initial jail to many escape attempts, it's no surprise to me that it's known to be haunted. And thinking back to that tragic fire, we arrive at our first ghost, Joe Bushey.
Now, I could have guessed. I was thinking when I was researching the history, I was like, I feel like Joe Bushey is going to be on this property.
Yeah, I feel like he has to, right?
Yeah.
And when I was researching the hauntings, I didn't know the history of Joe Bushey, so I just did a little bit more of research and arrived at basically what you outlined, that he burned down the jail. His ghost is now said to roam the halls of the new building.
I wonder if he is looking for an escape route.
Right, it's like he was trapped in the wooden building, and now he's trapped in the stone building, and he can't get out.
I wonder if his spirit is aware enough to be oh no, it's stone. Now I'm really stuck. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm sure wood is a lot easier to break through.
And also, if he is realizing that he's dead, he's probably wow, I really played myself.
Honestly, though, yeah. I can't even imagine, speaking seriously for a moment, I can't even imagine the terror he must have felt after setting the building on fire and not being able to get out.
Right. And of course, not to minimize loss of life in general.
Right.
But it is probably very disappointing.
Yes.
That he's wow, I really failed.
Oh, and you know what's interesting? I did some research on punishments at the time. And because I was thinking, oh no, is this the death penalty? Is that why he didn't want to go to trial. And of course, like, he didn't go to trial, so we don't know exactly what the punishment would have been. But at this time in the 1860s, there were laws being put into effect where larceny and like other minor crimes, you could no longer assign the death penalty to. So it was like mostly fines and some imprisonments, depending on the severity.
That seems like a very extreme response to want to burn down the jail.
And I was thinking, well, it's kind of a new law. So maybe
That's true.
the inmates like hadn't heard of it, or you know what I'm saying? Or like weren't aware that that wasn't one of the punishments anymore.
That could be. And what's interesting about how he haunts the new building is the cell block is said to be the very active part. I would think that he would be anywhere else,
Yeah.
but actually in the cell block or in a cell. The main report from visitors is random cold spots, and I'm always very skeptical of these things because we know that this building was built so long ago, and it is used as a museum now, but that doesn't mean that they have 100% made sure that the heating and cooling is uniform throughout.
Right. I don't know really much about architecture, but there might be some parts of the building that they like can't update other parts because old parts are still there. Does that make sense?
Yes. And the other thing about these cold spots, if they're Joe Bushey, that is really not aligned with the fire unless it's kind of like the foil to the fire, almost like he's trying to put it out.
That's true.
With the cold spots. But overall, we see with a lot of hauntings, it is in death as it was in life. So I think that he would be more likely to produce warm spots than cold.
I can imagine that other inmates may also be lingering here, and so maybe they're causing the cold spots instead of Joe Bushey specifically, because I'm sure that they were, in my opinion, if these cold spots are paranormal, to them, their life was very cold, I'm sure.
That's a good point, and I do think it would be dismissive to think that it's only Joe Bushey that's here. There's probably a lot of heightened emotion associated with the jail in general, and we know that spirits can tend to linger in areas of heightened emotion. Another claim that's seen here, or rather felt, is the claim of phantom hands. And this tends to happen throughout, and people think it could be Bushey, but like we said, there are tons of other ghosts there, and there are at least 2 other distinct ghosts there.
Okay.
They were inmates that actually took their lives there, one in 1913 and one in 1958.
That is very sad.
It is, and so the cold spots and the phantom hands could be them instead of Bushey.
Yeah, that would make sense to me too, is that like other distinct spirits are coming forward rather than just Joe Bushey, especially because you said he spends most of his time in the cell block.
Yes.
So outside of that, it could be other spirits.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. In addition to the cell block in the jail portion of the building, as mentioned in the historical section, there is the former sheriff's house on site. And these are also said to be haunted. Starting in the sheriff's house, phantom voices are heard throughout both of the floors there. People report that they're primarily whispers, and therefore it's not often stated what they're saying.
That makes sense to me. Especially because families were there. Now, I don't know if the whispers if like the whispering is significant and so like the people there are trying to be quiet, or if it's just coming across as whispers. Because when you mentioned voices, the first thing I thought of was like family camaraderie, like hanging out in the living room.
Yeah, I was thinking that, or maybe if they're like creeping around at night, or even like children whispering to each other, parents whispering to not wake up the children. Who knows? One EVP is fairly common, and it's the name of a former sheriff. It's Emma.
That doesn't surprise me. I feel like she had a very significant life here.
Right, and not only significant because she was one of the first female sheriffs, like you said, she really was responsible for so much of running the place.
Yes, and, also this space kind of holds tragedy for her as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. But the voice is saying Emma, so I wonder if it's her husband that passed away.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. I didn't even think about it like that, but yeah, and I I almost wonder if after his accident, he like returned to the house immediately and was like trying to get Emma's attention.
Oh, that's sweet. Or like help her.
Yeah.
That's sweet. It could also be one of the inmates saying Emma or children saying Emma.
That's
child saying Emma, rather. Some of the voices that are heard here seem to overlap, almost as if there are multiple conversations happening at once. And while I think that would make a lot of sense in the cell block, it makes less sense to me in the sheriff's house unless there was entertaining going on here.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you.
Or I guess if you have family, you could have overlapping conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder how, like, I know I've seen pictures of the sheriff's part of the home, and it is very like cozy. But I don't have a concept for how big the room is, and I'm wondering if it like even can entertain guests.
That's a good point. The other thing I was thinking is, what if the conversations are from different time periods? So they're completely separate from each other, just kind of playing at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Another claim in this portion of the house is that there are warm spots, specifically on the top floor. Again, we talked about potentially the heating and cooling system not being very regulated. But to me, this could be Joe Bushey because it's hot spots.
Completely agreed. Completely agreed. And here's the interesting part is I couldn't really find information on the first building that was there. So I even tried to look up like when that building was built, and I just couldn't really find anything. But I'm wondering if that was 1 or 2 floors, because if it was wood, I'm like, was it only 1 floor? And
That's a good point. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I would think it would be 1 floor.
Right? Like, that's what I was kind of thinking. Like, historically, maybe that makes more sense. So then when you said that it was on the 2nd floor, I was like, I do think it's still Joe Bushey, but I'm like wondering if he's up there like a 2nd floor.
He's like, how did I not know this was here?
Yeah.
Another haunting throughout the whole property is shadow figures. They're often seen quickly darting from room to room, as is fairly common with shadow figures. Sometimes there are footsteps that are heard when these shadow figures are seen. And in addition to the footsteps, people report one of your favorites, phantom knocking.
No.
Yes.
I'm not, just no. I think my brain turned off for a second because I was just like, nope, I don't want to deal with that.
And I think the fact that all of these are happening together really makes me believe that they're all paranormal. Footsteps and knocking or tapping, I'm very skeptical of. Footsteps can echo, houses can settle, pipes can make strange noises. But the fact that we're seeing shadow figures, then hearing footsteps, then hearing knocking, it seems like a sequence of events.
And there were many people in the building at the same time throughout its history. So it would make sense to me that there's walking around and knocking of walls and things like that.
And what's interesting is the knocking sound seems to not come from doors, but come from the walls or even the display cases.
The display cases is interesting. The walls, I almost understand depending on where in the building, because I was thinking in the cell blocks, if the inmates were knocking on walls or, you know, I don't know. Like, to me, the walls there might make sense to have noise coming from them because they're in their cells. But the display cases?
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I can't really think of an explanation for that unless the spirits want the artifact that's in there.
That's what I was thinking is like, they're like, hey, that's mine.
Right, but I think that would depend greatly on which cases are being knocked on.
True.
So I would want some more information on that. Another claim here is that the lights turn themselves on and off as paranormal. I'm always very, very skeptical of electricity. In these old places especially, things can be wired improperly. There can be ongoing issues. Would they likely fix it because it is a museum? Yes, but that doesn't mean that they 100% did.
Yeah, because like I mentioned earlier, and again, I really don't know how electric stuff works, but like what if they, by updating the lights, they have to get rid of another feature that they'd like to keep
Right.
in, keep in that old time?
Or what if it's just not even worth the money?
Actually, that is such a good point, because rewiring your whole house, I mean, at this point, it's not a house, it's a museum, but that is very expensive.
Right, and I think of places like Eastern State Penitentiary. that, penitentiary versus jail, but same use case here. The lighting is so dim and it hasn't been updated because why would they? It takes away from the historical aspect of it, and it's a ton of money to update. So I think it makes sense.
The other thing I didn't think of until right now, is the fact that they'd also probably have to tear into the walls. So maybe they're like, no, I don't want to do that to this building.
Yeah, that's not worth it. Unfortunately, the museum does not currently offer ghost tours or ghost hunts, but you can still visit it for the history. We would love to hear your experience from Kewaunee Jail Museum. You can email us at theteam@hauntedus.com and include Haunted Atlas Kewaunee Jail Museum in the subject, or find us on social media at HauntedUS. Tune in to our next episode to see where we drop the pin on our adventure across the Haunted US. This episode of Haunted Atlas was presented and researched by Sarah Sweeney and Erica Barrett, supported by research from Haunted US head writer Mitch Goth, with production assistance by David Sweeney and music by Colleen Johnson. Our executive producer is Brandon Ruxey. Haunted Atlas is a production of Haunted US. Visit hauntedus.com for more information.